Discussion on the topic, what skills are needed in the new era of employment. Chairing the session, we have Mr. Kamal Karanth, Trustee, Indian Staffing Federation, Managing Director, Kelly Services and Kelly OCG India. May I please now request Mr. Kamal Karanth to kindly come on stage and take his seat. We are also joined with the eminent personalities for this session. Ladies and gentlemen, please give a huge round of applause to Mr. Kamal Karanth and our panelists who would be joining us on stage, Mr. Partha Pratim Mitra, PLEA, Ministry of Labour and Employment, Mr. Judajith Das, Chief Human Resources, ICICI Prudential Life Insurance. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mr. Judajith Das. Mr. Sethuraman Mahalingam, former CFO, Tata Consultancy Services. Mr. Chaitanya N. Sreenivas, Director, HR, IBM GTS Delivery and India Area North. Mr. Scholte, Vice President, Sales and Marketing, Manpower Group. And Mr. Mark Keese, Head of Employment Analysis and Policy Division, OECD. Ladies and gentlemen, please give them a huge round of applause to all our esteemed panelists and chairperson. And I now hand over the floor to Mr. Kamal Karanth.
Good morning, everyone. This is the last time I thought I will moderate a session in ISF. Not because I'm leaving, but because they say that any job that is repeatable, you do repeatedly the same thing, that can be automated. So I don't know whether, the moderator job, which I've been doing for almost 3 years now, will go away too. And when I asked Mark to talk through a few things which are relevant to what we're going to talk, we looked at a very nice presentation that he has got us today for. I think that the next 7 to 10 minutes, we'll possibly look through the presentation, which has some interesting data points, and I think we'll ponder over that and also dip into the experiences of our co-panelists during the time. Mark, over to you.
Say hello to everybody. It's a great pleasure to be here and to thank the organizers for the very kind invitation to be here. I will be talking about what are some of the sort of skill needs for the future of work, and already I've discovered last night that in India it's not only important to have ICT skills, but very important to have dancing skills. And I think I have a lot to learn in that area. But anyway, it was a fantastic night last night, and I really enjoyed myself tremendously. So let me walk you through some of the slides that I have prepared. And what I want to say is, what are, first of all, some of the mega trends that are driving changes in the demand for skills? And I don't seem to be able to get this to work. Right, good. So first of all, it's not just technological change that is sort of driving the change in demand for skills. We have a number of other mega trends as well. So in particular, we have demographic change. So I'm having a few problems with the pointer. And we're also having digitalization and also globalization. So basically, demographic change is also very, very important. We know in the advanced economies, we have rapid population aging. So basically, 1 in 4 people will be aged over 65 in 2050 in the advanced economies. That will put a lot of stress on skill demands. How do we ensure sort of new skills come into the market? How do we ensure that we keep people's skills up to date? Very important. For the emerging economies, like India, There will also be the challenge of large cohorts of young people entering the labour market. And the development of those economies will be driven by the extent to which education and training systems, but also employers, are able to give those young people the skills that are needed for modern economies. So again, a tremendous challenge there as well. Globalization is also changing what we need in terms of skills. So no longer are employers just competing with neighboring employers, they're also competing with employers across the world. And there are these global supply chains which are rapidly changing occupations, skill needs in every country. So basically, we're becoming a more linked world. And finally, of course, digitalization. Again, that is causing automation of jobs, but it's also changing sort of work organization. So all of this basically means that we'll be changing how we will be doing jobs, where they will be performed, who will be doing these jobs, and of course, what these jobs will consist of. Now, the first question that's come up repeatedly is, are we actually, forget about how skills are changing, are we actually going towards the future where there will be just much fewer jobs altogether? So will automation actually drive out employment, and we'll actually see mass unemployment, or what's being called technological unemployment? So not just what jobs will we need, but will there actually be jobs there? And there's been some alarming estimates that we're living in a very different world from past technological change. We had the steam engine, we had electricity, but while these did destroy some jobs, basically they led to many more jobs being created and to rising living standards. But digitalization can actually automate many, many more jobs than what we thought were previously possible. So it's no longer just the routine jobs, it's a lot of cognitive jobs also that could be potentially routinized. Think about doctors, for example. Some of their diagnostic sort of ability perhaps could be done better by the computers in the future. So even jobs like that possibly could be automated. So some researchers have suggested, Frey and Osborne, for example, that you could have 50% of current jobs being automated in the next 20 years in the United States, but also in Europe. And of course, this has implications for emerging economies. But what they did is they looked at specific sort of occupations, looked at whether they could be automated, and then made their estimates of 50% of jobs being possibly automated away. We said, let's look at that a bit more carefully, because within occupations, people are doing very different jobs and have very different responsibilities, very different tasks, and not all of those tasks can be automated. So when we used our survey of adult skills that we'd carried out in 24 countries, we could actually look at the individual tasks workers are performing and then look to what extent, based on that, we come up with the number of jobs that can be automated. And basically, this chart shows you those figures there. And we came up with, of current jobs, only about 9% will be sort of automated in the future. So that's a much lower figure, sort of 9, depending on the country, 6 to 12% of jobs could be automated. However, when we looked at sort of a lower range, so we look at jobs in terms of tasks that about 50 to 70% of the tasks performed in a job could be automated, we get a much higher figure. So we get something like roughly about sort of 40 to sort of 60% of jobs. A big component of those jobs could be automated. So the whole job may not disappear, but the job will change substantially. And this is important for recruitment agencies and for people themselves, because it means a lot of what we're doing today will not be the same. It will change. So for all of us, including everybody in this room, our jobs may still be there in the future, in the next 5 to 10 years, but we will have to do it in different ways, use different tools to perform that. So again, it means we have to put much more stress on continuous learning and upgrading our skills. So getting people into the labour market will be important, ensuring they have the right skills, but then keeping those skills up to date. And I think, again, recruitment agencies also have a role to play here, ensuring that the workers that they're matching to jobs in the private sector and in the government sector have the possibilities to upgrade their skills. The other aspect is what sort of skills will we actually need as a result of digitalization? Well, I think you're all familiar with the fact that we've been seeing this sort of skill-biased technological change. What that means is that routine jobs in the first instance have been automated and are disappearing. And these routine jobs are both manual jobs, but also cognitive jobs, jobs like clerical work, and they have been disappearing. And at the other extremes, you've seen some increase, well, a large increase in jobs requiring higher level skills, interactive skills, for example. And at the bottom end, you've also, in the advanced economy, so if we look at the United States in the right of this slide, you'll see there's also been some increase in jobs requiring few or low skills, but these are interactive jobs. For example, caring for older people, for example, or nursing. So those sorts of jobs may not require very high-level skills, but skills that cannot be easily sort of replaced by robots. In India, which is the chart on the left, you see that, of course, the share of jobs involved in low skills has also been falling. And that's not surprising in the emerging economies because, of course, there was a much, much higher proportion of jobs in very, very low-skilled employment. And fortunately, we see that that is changing. With rising educational attainment, there's been a general shift towards the high end. The risk is, for emerging economies, is that in advanced economies, it was those mid-level jobs, those mid-skill level jobs that were the source of the rise of the middle class. And those jobs are the ones that are disappearing. So it leaves open the question, what will the emerging economies like India do to expand the middle class if those mid-level jobs in terms of skills, in terms of income, in terms of pay are sort of disappearing at a great rate? The other big change that is upon us at the moment, and which will be sort of developing very, very rapidly, is the so-called platform economy. This goes by various names: the sharing economy, the gig economy, the on-demand sort of economy. But basically, it's with the rise of the internet and the penetration of the internet sort of across all of our societies, even in poor countries, through the use of the mobile phones, the way we can organize work is changing dramatically. In the previous panel, we were talking about the rise of outsourcing. Well, this is going to increase even more because firms, companies can set up businesses where they no longer have employees. They basically have they have independent workers that are working for them. If we think about Uber, the taxi driver service, Uber drivers are not employees of Uber. They are independent, contracted out workers. Again, this has quite big implications for the recruitment agencies because basically these firms can bypass to a big extent the need to pass by recruitment agencies. It also has big implications for social and employment policies. How do we regulate these new forms of work, which on the one hand give a lot of flexibility to workers to earn second incomes, to top up their incomes, to work flexibly, but also means that they have less rights in terms of social protection. So again, all of these things, these trends are changing the way we think about skills and the sort of skills we need. So basically, individuals, when we think about workers, will be needing skills that are complementary to basically technological change. So they need complementary skills to what ICT, what robots can do. They need the ICT skills, but they also need interactive skills, stronger social skills, and so that's important. The other thing that we see is individuals will have to take on greater responsibility for their own skill development, their own decisions. If they are going to be these independent workers working for different companies, they will need to think about, how do I find out where these jobs are? How do I take responsibility for my own training? How do I take responsibility for my own social protection? So again, decision-making skills will be very important, as well as financial literacy skills. Also, what will be important is, of course, lastly, as I mentioned right at the beginning, is training policies. So we will see that, yes, we need to give people the right skills when they enter the labour market, but it will be important for companies, for individuals, to take on more responsibilities for upgrading their own skills. I won't go through these slides because I'm running out of time, but you'll have them available to you. Just to say that there are some worrying trends, which is, we know that ICT skills are becoming more important, and yet our international survey of adult skills shows that a large proportion of current workers do not have basic ICT skills, or those IT skills that they do have are very poor. That's what that chart shows. This chart just says, yes, training is going to be more important, but we see a lot of unequal access to training. So people that perhaps need the training the more are getting the least training. This just shows you the incidence of training. So people that got training in the last 12 months by level of literacy. So people that have poor literacy get the less training. That's the dark bars at the bottom. Those with the highest levels of literacy are the ones getting the most training at the top. And you see that standard relationship, that gap across all countries. So there's a number of questions which I'll only go through very quickly for skills policies, which is basically saying, how do we get the right balance? For example, we've talked a lot about the importance of soft skills, social interaction skills, but we also need the technical skills. So again, where is the right balance between those soft skills and the technical skills? And I think that's important. We hear a lot about employers saying soft skills are becoming increasingly important, very good presentation skills, creativity skills, but we shouldn't forget that employers also need those very strong technical skills. And lastly, just to say that we think there are three pillars that we need to build upon to improve employability and to cope with the challenges that all of our economies are facing. The first of all, we need to assess better and anticipate better changing skill needs. That's important in all of our economies, and I think recruitment agencies also have a role to play, and I see that companies like Manpower, like other companies as well, are playing a role in this, looking at how our skill needs changing, informing employers of that, informing education and training institutions of those changes, and working together to try and ensure that people do have good access to good information so they can make appropriate decisions about what skills to invest in. Also too, of course, what we think is important is reinforcing the role of work-based learning. That's vitally important. It's not just learning in initial education, but as I said, ongoing learning is important, and many of the skills that keep us employable, we actually learn in the workplace. So again, vitally important. And lastly, we need to make workplaces more adaptable. So ensuring that employers are also taking advantage of the latest developments in terms of technology, ICT, and are continuously upgrading their demands for skills, because that will drive faster productivity and rising living standards for everybody. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mark. Now let's begin our conversations with our panelists, and some parts we'll take from Mark and some possibly based on our own experiences. Maybe I want to start with you, Mr. Mahalingam. One of the things that we have seen for a fairly long time in India is that when we talk about skills, jobs, most of the times the pointer is towards the IT industry, because that's where we could really count how many jobs or how many new people got added. We could really count them. And we always looked up to it, and every time an IT industry says we're going to automate, there's going to be less jobs, we actually all worry. So when you look at what's happening now versus what happened over the last 2 decades, when we added thousands of people, this scare of automation, is it really true from IT industry perspective?
Certainly it is true from an IT industry perspective, but one of the issues that I think Mark has not dealt with is really in terms of shifting of jobs as well, because there are jobs that have been shifted from Europe, United States, and many of these advanced countries to countries like India, and therefore there is an additional dimension that we need to be looking at. IT obviously changes the nature of job. For instance, we did a project for a race course, and one of the drivers that we understood as we started doing the project was that the faster you are able to distribute the money to the punters, the more amount of business that comes into the race course itself, because immediately the punter goes ahead and essentially bets on the next race. He doesn't wait for the race after that, and so on. And therefore, the velocity of the business itself undergoes a fairly massive change, which in a sense introduces the need for a lot more of counters for the purpose of taking on bets and so on. And that increases the need for a number of machines and or people and so on. So that is while the IT industry has gone ahead and automated many things, it has also resulted in expansion of the business environment itself. One of the things that we now talk about is this fourth industrial revolution, which is really which is going to change the nature of things, where IT is going to combine with the biological and many other areas to completely transform the healthcare industry, diagnosis, and many of those kinds of things. And what it does is to be in a position to provide much greater capability to the individual to track the progress. But at the same time, it is going to demand a number of other, I won't call it, I don't want to re-emphasize that, but certainly in a sense, the paramedical skills. And skills where even before the expert comes along, there is going to be a fair amount of interaction. And hopefully it is going to be better for the mankind in terms of being able to resolve the problems and so on. So it is definitely changing the jobs, which is, I think, how he also ended his presentation, that there is going to be a massive restructuring, and are we prepared for it is really a question.
Thank you. I still remember that, when computers were new, in India at least, we remember some of the famous politicians saying that this will take away the jobs, so we shouldn't have it around. And today, some of those parties have actually won elections based on strong analytics, which is coming through the computers, and people are distributing laptops free after winning the elections, so much so that it has become part of our life now. And I think of it 20 years ago, even I felt, maybe, yeah, they are true, So clearly, I think when we talk about something getting automated, jobs going away, Mark with a pinch of salt, sometimes it looks like, it's overstated. It's overstated. And that also brings us to some of the pointers of, what exactly is happening in some of the industries, And when I look at, I want to stay with IT industry for a while because we started with that, and go to Chaitanya. And, I'm scared of Watson, as to what all it can do. But at the same time, does it really shift, when we take the example of what computers did to us, and at the forefront of what you're seeing, whether it is automation, whether it is the jobs that is getting added, what's your own view on this so-called jobs are going to go away? 50% of the so-called jobs are going to go away. That's what Mark is saying.
First of all, is automation here to stay? Yes, it is here. You can call it innovation, you can call it technology advancement, etc. The world we live in is changing. It's getting, it's already flat. It's faster. It's more connected than ever. And if you take a step back and see what automation is actually doing, I think Mr. Mahalingam mentioned the healthcare industry. It's actually helping us do things faster and better. It's not taking away the doctor. It's providing a tool to the doctor to do things faster. It's taking enormous amount of big data, historical data, and specific to the patient. It's able to then correlate and give you a deduction and a diagnosis. And a very simple thing, I think in the panel yesterday we spoke about driverless cars. Would that take away jobs? I'm hoping we'll follow lanes in India when that happens, right? But the job's not going away. The task is changing. I think, Mark, you mentioned in your charts. Will that particular job go away? No. The nature of the job and the task that job does will change, because now you're going to have something to help you. And if you then start looking at what is the opportunity on automation, in the workforce, the entry point is going to change. So if you look at, India, for example, massive workforce that we are creating, it's coming up, we are trying to skill them. I think staffing organizations need to scale up. It's not going to be just staffing. You'll have to staff, train, and deploy, because the entry level that's coming in right now, yes, industry complains about soft skills, complains about technology, but the gap is increasing because of automation. Maybe that's another way to look at it. So there's an opportunity there. I think earlier we were talking about if there's a financial model, then somebody will come and fill it. So the opportunity is really how can I train, skill up in a very fast way, and bring this workforce into the right entry point into the workforce.
Thank you, Chaitanya. Also, taking it further, Fritz, I'm coming to you now. There is a new startup which has come in India. It's a gentleman who was running a Silicon Valley company. He says marketeers are not required anymore. He said he's come up with a digital platform because he believes that marketing today is done more by intuition, by the individual, but it has to be done more systematically. So he's created a platform which is today only for SMEs, as he claims, where marketing is automated on the digital platform. You have to sign on and it does everything that is required to do. So what happens to jobs like yours?
My job? I don't know, you have to ask my boss, I think. Will marketing disappear? I think parts of marketing, like parts of a whole lot of jobs will change, like the speaker already said. But will it change? No, because marketing, sales, a lot of jobs also require interaction between people. And interactions between people, like we saw yesterday evening, some things cannot be automated. In your presentation, it was dancing with robots, but robots will never dance alone. And I think creativity, empathy will be there forever. I think maybe when you see that analytical skills, technological skills, maybe require even more social skills from us as human beings. Because it cannot be all algorithms in the end. It's us people that will be interacting. And that will be for marketing as well, because it's about understanding people. So it will change, but not everything.
Thank you, Fritz. If I had to take that line of thought and even what Mark mentioned, that some of the jobs which are likely to sort of requiring face-to-face interaction may actually survive. But also at a very high level, are we also getting very ahead of ourselves in this conversation, sir? I'm coming to Mr. Mitra now. In a country where job creation, the number of jobs created versus the number of people coming to the job force is a huge challenge, and all of us are looking at how we can create more jobs. Are we getting ahead of ourselves in terms of talking even about the skills of which are getting obsolete versus possibly how do we create jobs? The conversation of this obsoleteness also, are we getting ahead of ourselves is my question.
Good morning. A very important question has been raised about whether we are at all thinking about obsolescence as new jobs get created. I think as my earlier panelists and fellow speakers have said, that automation is here to stay. We have an aspirational workforce. I think the aspirational part of it will drive the economy. Let us not think that jobs are going to go away, new jobs are not going to be created. I think this is an ecosystem which would throw up new jobs, and obsolescence, of course, is part of any development. If you have cared to see the history of all development processes, somebody mentioned about the 4th industrial revolution. I think creation of new jobs, obsolescence is part of it. But what the prime speaker in his presentation has mentioned, very important points were raised as to the need for consciousness both on the part of the employers, on the part of the workers, and also on the part of the government to kind of take this factor into consideration. And any policy which attempts to kind of match employment with skills will have to take this into consideration. So I think there's no denying the fact that obsolescence is going to happen. But the point is that whether new jobs are going to beat this rate of obsolescence. I think that is the critical factor. So there, I think industry, because of the global imperatives, will kind of push the frontier, the technology frontier, and the workforce and the government would naturally kind of create that enabling environment with so much of emphasis these days on e-governance and big data, because government is now gradually changing its focus through the relaxation and the rationalization of labor laws towards more of e-governance, which means that more of transparency, more of trust, which itself brings out the entire change in focus, which would create new skills. And the platform economy, as somebody has mentioned, yes, we can in a nutshell describe that as a platform economy, but that's going to kind of change the entire game, change the entire game of governance in this country, for which I think let us all be prepared, let the industry be prepared, let the government be prepared, that this is a change which we cannot kind of prevent, and it's a good thing to happen. I think gone are the days of the Inspector Raj, where the inspector goes and kind of asks for the documents. All the elements of that would be there, but through an e-governance and a more transparent mechanism, and the workers would certainly not be denied their employment security, wage security, and more important, the social security. So with these three key kind of objectives, the e-governance that is being unleashed in this economy would demand new set of skills. I think industry, government, and the workers will have to recognize this, and the aspirational side of it would drive this entire ecosystem. Let me tell you that, be it through either wage employment or through self-employment. The other big issue, I think, which in government, what we are grappling with is the big databases which we have created. I think there's plenty of information, analytics, how to analyze these information is of crucial importance, and how do we kind of narrow it down to platforms and then extend it to the development paradigm. I think today Mint has carried a very interesting news item about how Tata Trust has kind of carried this exercise in one of the districts in Maharashtra. I think we will probably, see more of these experiments. I was myself involved in the socio-economic caste census in the Ministry of Rural Development, where for the first time we had introduced the tablet PCs in the computation of the census data. So I think that was the first of its kind, a major exercise in the government way back in 2011. So I think more such paradigms would be kind of seen, and we are all prepared for it. I think I can tell you that.
Thank you, Mr. Mitra. One of the things of moderating a session also, they make you a moderator because you are not a subject matter expert. That means, you just bounce off from one to another. So that's the role. So I called somebody yesterday because I didn't know anything about this. And when I asked for the, this so-called jobs going away and the scare of it, one of the persons whom I respect, he said this in Hindi, but we have an international audience, so I'll try to, the fun of it is if I say it in Hindi actually, like he said, it's nice to sit in Taj and, with international audience and talk about automation, jobs going away, somebody will show you a study and, talk about this. But that is hardly any percentage difference to the number of jobs that are going to go away to the extent of the labor population that we have. He says the real thing is, whatever happens, you will still have that many number of people required to an economy like India. And, you're talking about robotics, you're talking about whatever digitization that's going to happen, it's a very small percentage. And I don't know why it even requires a session like this, So what I picked up from that is, do all these initiatives, like, or the technology, interventions that come in and so-called efficiency that comes through that, which creates job loss, really happen? One such industry which possibly put it ahead of itself and said, okay, you can go online and buy insurances now. I want to come to Judajith and ask, what is that has really changed? You know, has it made really significant difference in terms of number of people buying online, number of jobs going away because of that, and how has insurance industry in total actually looked at it?
Sure. Thank you. Good morning. So let me take the question directly about life insurance. So we all know that digital is here. So I think one big shift that has happened, and you find that in banking as well, and across all forms of financial services, is that the paper processes. So there was a lot of paperwork that used to happen. Having digitized that, right? A lot of the jobs that involved transactional paperwork have been eliminated, right? So to give an example, when we started the life insurance industry, we had people in our bank, in our insurance office branches. The salesperson would go to the customer, fill up forms, collect documents, and these documents could be proof of birth, photographs, all paper-intensive documents, right? The whole process was paper-intensive. Now, in a digital environment, you don't need paper anymore. So you have a tablet. The processes are enabled where you can take a photograph through the camera embedded in the tablet. You take a scanned copy of your birth certificate. The customer can fill up the data online, and the salesperson, along with the customer, can fill up the data online. Today, the ecosystem has happened. For example, if I put in the Aadhaar number, which is the UID number for the Indians, well, I don't need an address proof because it can extract that data from the system. So the ecosystem is also developing around us, which allows us to eliminate a lot of the jobs which earlier would have been there in the branches, where the salesperson would come and give all the papers, somebody would have to cross-check, make sure the data entry has been done correctly, all the documents were there, you send it by courier, then somebody receives it, checks whether the documents are in place, and then it's entered into a system again. All this has got eliminated, because right now the salesperson can directly upload the documents, and the data quality is also improved. So, and the policy can be issued in less than a couple of hours, with some mandatory checks if there is a medical health to be looked at required. Otherwise, even that has got eliminated because people are living longer. So up to a limit, you don't need medical underwriting and insurance, which used to be there earlier. So the whole process, now you can technically sit across the table with a customer and give him a policy or her a policy in half an hour, which earlier would have taken 2 weeks or 3 weeks to fulfill. So this is how digitization has eliminated certain jobs. On the flip side, what are the jobs getting created? Of course, you have a team of people working on the digital space. Now, these could be people who are looking at the process side, they're looking at the software development side, the program development side. To manage the ecosystem itself, you need a certain set of skills. So that's emerging. So, but I wanted to make a couple of points separately to this. One is, I think, fundamentally, if you look at the sales side, where the bulk of the jobs are, right? What is technology doing? It's helping us to make some of the knowledge that we used to impart to salespeople, in a sense, the process getting eliminated. So now if I have a salesperson with a customer, I can technically embed a video which talks about the product. So earlier, if it took me 2 days to train a salesperson on a product, I don't need to spend the 2 days. I can spend 2 hours, and the salesperson can sit in front of the customer and play the video about the product, and that can be a standardized delivery. So what we are doing essentially is to make the job simpler. So one is the elimination of the job itself. The two is the automation, which can also eliminate the job technically, or you can outsource, because then sometimes we found in data management, centralization is a far better way of doing it rather than having discrete people doing it. And finally, using technology to make the job simpler so that the training time reduce. I want to make one last point before I hand back the mic. Now, the question is, one of the things what is the central problem that we are combating here? We are saying, ideally, in an ideal world, supply of skills should equal demand for skills. Now, is that realistic? Because fundamentally, for new skills to happen, there has to be some level and time for the skill to mature, the practice to mature, before it can be codified into knowledge or theory, and then taught through an education institute. So fundamentally, I don't think organizations can run away from the fact and say that we will not be responsible for skill development, because for any new skill, there is always going to be a lag between the practice becoming mature and then getting codified and translated knowledge. Linked to that is the whole thing, how much is the skill premium we are willing to pay for? So the question in our industry, for example, financial planning, which is advice-based. how many consumers are willing to pay for financial advice? If there is the demand, there will be a certain higher level of skills the salespeople will invest in because they can command a higher premium. So similarly, for certified electricians or certified plumbers, if you're not willing to pay for the skill premium, it's unlikely that you will see quality maturation to happen. So I wanted to just bring that point. Thanks.
Thank you, Judajith. I think very, very relevant points. And I want to bounce some of those with Mark as well. Mark, when we talk about, what can government do, what should companies do is one of the things that Judajith said. Anywhere in the world that you've seen where the skill shortage, let's say, in some countries, I know pharmacists are not there, nurses are not enough. I know we can't produce them overnight, but has there been any private sector initiative which is sort of trying to address some of these skill shortages which have been also emerging, or the skills of tomorrow, if we are to go there?
I think it's a very important question, which is who has the responsibility for skill development? And I think basically the answer is it's always going to be a shared responsibility between governments, between employers, and by individuals themselves. I think the last point made about, sort of who actually pays for skills is important. We see that in many of these studies that employers have done and surveys of employers where you see a high percentage of people, that employers are saying that 20% of their vacancies they can't fill are hard to fill vacancies. When you drill down and look at why they can't find people, sometimes it's because they're not paying the market rate, the going rate. And so at the wage that they're offering, they can't find people. So it may be that they need to pay a higher rate. But I think there's interesting initiatives even for many of the people in this room. Randstad, Manpower themselves are actually delivering skills training for workers to ensure that they do have the skills that employers are looking for. So again, there is room for private providers of employment services to also engage in training, offer suitable training. Sometimes it doesn't have to be basic training in fundamental skills. It can be just topping up people's skills and, for example, just ensuring that they know how to keep their CVs up to date, for example, and what should you put in your CVs, how to present yourself in an interview, or when you do turn up for a temporary work, making sure you turn up on time, making sure you have appropriate clothing. So those sorts of skills can be just as important as the ICT skills.
Yeah, Mark, well, I couldn't agree more. And I think, like Anne-Marie Muntz yesterday already said, we as an industry have a responsibility here. Where it comes to employers and employees, we can step up as an industry. And it's not only a responsibility, we'll always also have a big chance here. We have the data. We can prove that things are happening, because I don't see a lot of action with companies. It's like the problem will be for someone else and not for themselves. But we facilitate sustainable access to work for a lot of people. That's what we did, that's what we will do. So I think in this topic, we as an industry have a big role to play.
My own specific question was also about any specific countries in which any certain skills of tomorrow that private sector has actually initiated to intervene? Any countries that you can take names of?
I think an interesting example is going on in Germany, and again, it's an example of a good collaboration between industry and government. They're talking about basically the industry of tomorrow and manufacturing 2.0 or something. So they're looking at what are the new skill needs, and again, it's the government working very closely with industry, saying where are the new skills. How do we actually match skill supplies with skill demands? And so I think Germany is taking a big leap forward there and just saying we're not going to do things in the same way that we've already done them. And the government recognizes it's part of the responsibility. They have to ensure that the basic education and training system is giving young people the skills that they need for the future of work, but also working with industry, saying, how can we better meet your needs, and what does industry itself have to do in terms of ensuring that there is continuous training to workers? Because particularly in the case of Germany, it's an aging society, so many of the new skills that will be needed have to be provided by people already in work. And so keeping their skills up to date is just as important.
Thank you for that. And I think on the point that has been raised here, and also I've heard this before in these forums, that skill enhancement is important. Staffing companies need to step up, train everybody and send it to us. And for an enhanced skill, there will be demand, but who's going to pay? Our own experience is nobody wants to pay for it. Many people come and tell us, I've been in this industry for long, saying if they're upskilled, you need to upskill, So none of the staffing companies have gone and really invested in training, because in India, I don't know elsewhere, and I'm doubtful whether anybody's going to pay for it in a competitive market. As soon as there's a markdown, quarterly results are bad, the first thing the companies do is to call and ask the staffing company to cut down by 2%, So I really don't know whether it is still possible that, for an enhanced skill, corporates are today willing to pay. That is not the experience, at least. So, I want to ask Mr. Mahalingam on that, is that, do you think that is going to change at all?
For Confederation of Indian Industry, I'm also in charge of the task force and sector skill councils and employment. And to add to Mr. Keese's point, what we are essentially attempting to do is to get people prepared for the new industry in each of these sectors. In fact, in the new SSC 2.0, that's one of the critical points that we have made. But there is always a feeling that while India is emphasizing on skill development, it has not resulted in improved employment generation, and certainly, people getting into the employment area. And the second thing is that they are also not getting paid much more for the skills. As you correctly pointed out, when there is a downturn, immediately they want to cut down on the cost, which means that you want to cut down on the this is an area that we have taken up, and we have said that if we can demonstrate the productivity improvement that is coming out of skills, and therefore the extent of money that needs to get shared as far with the skill provider itself is a very important area. And that's an exercise that we are attempting to do right now, and hopefully that will result in better pay for the newly skilled employees.
Thank you, sir. A bit on the side of, I think, controversy, but is there going to be a kind of a gender-based jobs elimination? There's this interesting Oxford research report which came out in August. Two of the researchers actually looked at a couple of markets, and one was specifically interested to US, where they said you can possibly eliminate more jobs done by men compared to the jobs done by women. The data points that they provide is, let's say there are 3 million truck drivers in US, maybe that can get automated. That's what we'll be threatening to do, right? Driverless cars and, I don't know, trucks. Sounds scary if trucks are driverless, but if you compare that with, because 95% of truck drivers are men globally. India, I think it should be 100%. When you look at the jobs done by women, which is a little more complex in nature, like secretarial, administrative, 95% of the nurses globally are women. Think about it, if there is a dementia patient and, what to do with the patient cannot be decided by, a machine. Somebody has to look and say, this is how it looks like, and this is what has to be done. So on the gender side, this is what has come out. So anybody wants to go on that, Chaitanya?
So I get the picky one. I think from an industry perspective, there'll always be a constant rebalancing that'll happen, whether it's technology coming in and forcing you to do that or the environment. There will be an evolution that'll happen, and I think market forces will take care of that as opposed to us trying to drive different things. At least in the IT industry, we have had our fair share when we first started the whole outsourcing business because of shifts. We had difficulty for night shifts. It's also the ecosystem around us. Do you have safe transport? Can you get them back and forth safely? So those, as the ecosystem has evolved, some of those have now been equalized. So you're seeing a little bit more. Again, I think it's a balance. The market will take care of that, but I don't see any definitive push one way or another. I think the market forces are doing what is required by industry.
I agree. I think when we wanted tons of computer engineers, we saw AppTech and IIT setting up huge centers and thousands of people got trained. So I think if there's demand for skills, supply will anyhow come into play is another way to look at. But one question before I open up to all of you, to Mr. Mitra, is always the private sector comes and asks, what is government doing for us? You know, government should do the following things, and especially related to skills, because we are not getting ready-made people kinds of stuff. Is it fair for private sector to even ask for things like that?
See, as I mentioned early on, I think this is a partnership game, you know. Government, of course, can create the enabling environment, can create the institutions, but unless the private sector comes on board and assesses the skills, I don't think it can be a single kind of entity which can work. So it's a team effort. I think let us recognize that, and private sector does recognize that. I think it's a team effort, and some of the private ITIs or some of the ITIs on which we have you know, the private sector on board have been doing immensely, you know, well, in the sense that the exact skill match is there. We have the Gujarat experience where the industry associations are very much on board, and they kind of match the skills which would be required in the next maybe 5 years, and then train the ITI workers, you know, the ITI students, and then they get into the industry through the apprentice mode. So I think it's a strategy which both the industry and the government has to emerge, and I think the state governments have very well recognized this. So I think that's where the situation is today. Yeah.
Thank you, sir. With that, now I'll sort of open up the floor for questions. Mehul, you go first. I saw you first.
Hi, my name is Mehul Shah. I represent Collabra. We just spoke about you know, the skills and the supply and the demand, and you know, in IT technologies, if you see the big data, Hadoop, and the disruptive technologies, there is a huge gap. You know, as we talk, there's about a 75,000 jobs deficit in APAC itself, about a 200,000 job deficit in the US in the next coming 2 years by 2018. Just the way India latched on to producing these skills, you know, after, you know, in 90s, you know, in .NET and Java days, and became the leader, and the IT industry boomed. You know, and of course we are talking about, you know, the government and the private sector both, you know, will have to play a role. Can somebody please guide on the approach, because as we speak, the gap is widening right now. Leave alone jobs going away. Right now there is a huge deficit. So what should be our approach as an industry to really collaborate with the government and the private sector, and how quickly can we do this? Because as we speak, you know, this gap is widening. Thank you.
I'll possibly pass that to Mr. Mahalingam. But you know, Mehul, it's a good problem to have if I am you, because that's when you and I survive, you know. So if there are skill shortage, somebody will come to you and me and say, find them. If everybody is available next door, I don't know what staffing companies will do.
You know, the IT industry has been, I mean, in the kind of example that you had given, has been fairly good in terms of being able to address that problem, because, you know, for instance, when I began my career as a programmer, I coded in COBOL, which is a skill that is totally extinct right now, and most of the people, you know, then we started developing them on different skills. And even now, I think there is a big technological change that is taking place, and therefore, you know, it is essentially accelerating the pace. In fact, you can't get, the Y2K was a very big advantage for many of us old programmers, because suddenly our languages were very important for that short period of 2 or 3 years, and then of course all that vanished. And therefore, you know, IT industry is prepared. But I just want to add one thing. It is not just the language, or it's not just the platform, but it is also the capability to organize data. For instance, when you get big data, and I worked with some of the Indian government kind of issues and so on, there is a phenomenal amount of data for the purpose of e-governance, but the data integrity is unproven. And data sharing, data exchange is uneven at this point in time. In fact, we did an exercise as part of a tax commission that I was part of, and where we found that if only they combined the VAT data and the indirect taxes data, the central government VAT data sitting with the state government and so on, that itself could generate a phenomenal amount of income, mainly because you would identify people who were not paying taxes and be able to go after that. So these, and who's the person who's going to ensure that the data integrity exists? How do we make sure that that reconciliation process takes place in the government? So there are a number of jobs that will get created as a result of it, not just at the higher end that he talked about, but also at the data reconciliation end.
Hi, Tom Hadley from the REC UK Federation. Mark, you mentioned at the start that some of the big changes would be about how we work, etc. But you also mentioned who's going to be doing the work. And leading on from the gender question, I'm interested to know, do we think that the future work will provide more opportunities for underrepresented groups like people with disabilities, for example? So is it an opportunity for us to open the door and for our industry to help in getting substantially more people with disabilities into work, for example?
Yeah, so I think that's a very good question. Let me come back to the question on gender, and I think it's always been a man's world, but it's becoming less of a man's world, and so if it becomes a bit more of a woman's world, I think that's something that we should absolutely welcome. And I think sort of new technology actually does give some bigger advantages to women in the sense of being able to combine both family and professional responsibilities in a more flexible way. Men also, though, should seize those that opportunity and also think that they can combine their family responsibilities as well, and it's not just something for women. So I think there are sort of opportunities there for greater equality. But that does mean fighting against the discrimination that is there, and not just against women, but these other sort of disadvantaged groups or underrepresented groups in the labor market, such as people with disabilities. Technology, again, has a role to play, so that can, again, allow people with disabilities to do many more jobs than what could be done in the past, because some of those jobs they can do from the convenience of their home. They don't need to physically go to an office somewhere. So, it offers opportunities if we can get rid of the discrimination that is still there, where people that have some form of physical or mental disability are somehow seen as less capable as the rest of us, which of course is entirely wrong. And I think we shouldn't forget also, it's not just physical disability, it is people with mental health issues, and this is actually concerns all of us. I think we see the studies say that at any point in time, 1 in 5 of us will suffer some form of mild mental health issue, such as depression, and that can even rise to 1 in 2 of us when you look through our entire life cycle. And businesses and governments have been very, very bad at dealing with people with mental health issues. How do we keep them integrated into the workplace? Let's hope that we can use technology to increase the flexibility, ensure that every sort of disadvantaged group is well represented at work, but again, it comes down to tackling some of the discrimination and the myths that we have about these groups.
Thank you, Mark, and we can see that on the panel also, the gender is quite visible there. The gentleman in the back.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Kishore Tiwari, and I represent Caliber Human Capital in North India. During the discussion, there was a discussion about more and more technology coming in and people losing their job. Then somebody mentioned a point that nobody is going to lose the job, but the task is changing. Now my question is, all these people, like there was an example of drivers given that once the driverless cars are coming, they will be losing their jobs. But even if they are not losing their job, just a task is changing, what should be the role of the staffing companies and the HR departments of the corporates to ensure that they are not scared about losing their job. Because these people are working at the entry level and they are the first people in the organization who might feel threatened when we get technologies and we get driverless cars. So what should be the approach of the staffing companies and the human resources departments of the corporates to ensure that they are not scared and they feel enlightened within the organization? They don't have any such threat or something. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll ask Judajith to answer that.
Okay, so my learning over the last 20 years has been that fundamentally, one of the challenges is that we look at all skills or departments or functions in silos. And typically, you found career growth happening in that function. Now, one challenge that it presents is that people become less flexible and less adaptable because you're doing the same job over and over again. So while there is a certain premium that you get in terms of skill development and skill quality, it becomes overstated when you're doing the same job over 20, 30 years, right? So the challenge is, and one of the things we know is that we are living in a world which is going to keep changing. So if the only antidote to that is you need a flexible organization, you need an adaptable organization, then one way to do that is to move people across or rotate people across departments. From an HR policy perspective, my fundamental belief is that I think while the discourse is more around training and classroom-based or individual-led learning, a large part of the learning happens disproportionately on the job. And therefore, if you move people around jobs, and the second part being, a lot of us learn from our managers or our bosses by seeing them. So it's only a fraction of our skill development that really happens in the classroom, which is knowledge intensive. And I'm not taking that away. So probably, at least in my business, what we've done is we prefer to hire fresh graduates from universities or colleges or MBAs, and then we rotate people across jobs. So if you spend more than 5 years in a role, we tend to definitely try and move you around. We call it fungibility. And we find that when a person has done 3, 4 different roles over 20 years, they can do many other roles. And that is the crux of employability. And through that process, people become more flexible and adaptable. So as technology changes, as customer shifts change, and we know that we're living in a world in change, they're far more able to adapt. One last point I want to make about this is, one challenge in our Indian context, I believe, is that the role of the supervisor. Because fundamentally, we are going to be for the next at least 20 years, though yesterday I only read an article that the replacement rate in India for population is, it's fallen just to about replacement rate. So actually, there will not be a demographic dividend post the next 20 years. So the question for us is that for the next 20 years, at least, we're going to have this problem of the young leading the young. Now, a large part of skill development, coaching on the job is the role of the supervisor. And when you have, so on the soft skills part of it, the role of a manager in coaching, in nurturing talent and developing, you can't really expect a 25-year-old supervisor or team leader to be a great coach or a skill developer, like you can't expect a 14-year-old to be a great parent. So I think fundamentally we're going to have this bit of a gap for the foreseeable future, because when I joined work, I was lucky enough and privileged enough to have bosses who were at least 10, 15 years who could give me much more. And that reality is not there for a lot of entry-level people. So that becomes a bit of an issue. I think we'll have to live with that for the next 20 years, till such time we see this shift happening.
Thank you, Judajith. I think we possibly may need to close this session by saying that we don't have the answer as to what the drivers will do when, the cars all will start driving by themselves, So thank you for the questions, and thank you for all the panelists for your participation and the preparation. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much from our end as well. And we would like to commemorate this occasion by presenting a small token of appreciation, for which may I please request Mr. Mehul Shah, Managing Director, Collabra, to kindly come on stage and present eminent personalities on the stage with a small token of appreciation. Starting with, we would like to felicitate Mr. Kamal Karanth. Mr. Partha Pratim. Mr. Chaitanya Sreenivas. Mr. Judajith. Mr. Sethuraman Mahalingam. Mr. Keese. And Mr. Scholte. Thank you so much. May I please request our members of the panel to kindly come forward for a group photograph session.
Employer, candidate. We exist to connect these two people. And we've been the engineer of that connection for 2 decades. The only difference between then and now is everything. 20 years ago, a candidate used an average of 2 sources to search for a job. Today, 16. 20 years ago, a recruiter had to maintain a fax machine and a filing cabinet.
And with this, ladies and gentlemen, we are now breaking for a tea break session, which will be once again for a half an hour duration. And would like to remind all of you, do tweet in your comments, your valuable feedback, your insights regarding the conference at hashtag WEC India 2016 and hashtag SHEED 2016. And see you back soon. Thank you.